biggest challenge is just identifying that transferable skill set and truly translating the military language into language that the civilian sector is going to understand. And so first we have to identify what our transferable skill sets are.
Hello, and welcome to Backstage Pass with the HR Rockstar podcast, the show that cranks up the volume on HR and talent strategies to workplace culture and career insights. Because in today's world, HR isn't just behind the scenes, it's center stage. I'm your host, Jay Arnold. In the world of HR, talent, business, and more, there are times where you recognize top performers within the workplace. You may refer to them as rock stars at what they do. My thought was, why not combine my love of HR as my career with my experience of 10 plus years performing shows around Michigan and the Midwest in my rock band, chasing the dream of being an actual rock star. Together we'll disrupt, innovate, and amplify the future of work. So grab your pass, turn it up, and let's make some noise. Today we're diving into a topic that's critical for businesses of all sizes: project management, especially for those transitioning from military to civilian and corporate life. In this episode, we'll break down the essential skills every project manager needs. I'm thrilled to welcome Misty Moreno, veteran advocate and trainer dedicated to helping professionals, especially fellow veterans, build successful careers in project management. With her extensive experience in both the military and corporate sectors, she brings a wealth of knowledge on leadership, structure, and how to navigate career transitions. Before we jump in, if you enjoy this episode, be sure to subscribe and share with your network, and always feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Instagram. All right, let's get started. Here's my conversation with Misty Moreno on project management, leadership, and the power of veterans in the workforce. Hi, Misty. Thanks so much for being here today. We've had the pleasure of working together for a couple of years in the past. What's funny is we've never had the chance to actually meet in person. Looking back, I realized you hired into our previous company in June of 2020, right in the peak of COVID. Perhaps someday, if I'm in South Carolina, we'll finally be able to meet for that cup of coffee in person versus virtual, but we see each other on LinkedIn a lot. Before we jump into all the different topics, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
In June of 2020, I actually left the military. I officially retired in September of 2020, but I started at our previous company in June. And so it was in the height of COVID, and I was super surprised that I even got an interview. But fun fact, Marissa, the recruiter, she actually sourced me from LinkedIn. And so she found me on LinkedIn, found my human resources business partner title in my headline, reached out to me and asked me if I would want to interview for the position. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. So I did a phone interview with her and then interviewed with the HR manager. And I worked at that company for 4 years. It was an awesome experience. And that's where I truly learned that I love human resources. I love project management, and I get to combine both of those at that previous company. And now I get to train and develop other veterans to be human resources professionals and project managers in the civilian sector.
I remember when we first joined and we were chatting through chats and then getting on calls. It was just such a weird time back then. That's awesome. I didn't realize she was the one that recruited you into the company.
I share that story a lot because Marissa did everything that we in the military teach. This is what's going to happen. Establish a LinkedIn profile. Make sure that the job that you want is in your headline so recruiters can source you. They're going to reach out to you via messaging. So make sure you always look at your messages. And then when they respond to you, ask them to call you so you can make sure that they're a real person. And then on that phone call, everything was so textbook. And Marissa, she's a great recruiter. And she has gone on to several different jobs now recruiting. But she's the one that brought me to our company. And honestly, it was the best 4 years of my professional career. I only left because my desires changed a little bit as far as wanting to be in my family's life. But I would go back in a heartbeat if my circumstances changed a little bit. My son is a senior in high school or will be soon. And so I wanted to be present. But yeah, Marissa was a great example of what we try to teach veterans, like get on LinkedIn, always be looking have that conversation, and then you can land your next role.
Could you share a little bit about your background and your career journey, like from the Air Force to HR and project management? People think of their career trajectory as, they keep going up. You've kind of been all over the place, which is like so many people, their careers, except one big piece is the Air Force compared to people that have not served the country.
Yeah, I graduated high school, went to Johnson & Wales University in Providence, Rhode Island, achieved an associate's degree in fashion merchandising. And when I finished my associate's degree, I told my father that, hey, I don't want to go back to college. And he's like, well, you don't have a lot of options. I was walking home in Providence, Rhode Island, because that's all you did. You just walked everywhere or took the bus. I was walking home, went past a recruiter station, and I walked in and I was like, hey, I'd like to join the service. And I looked at the Air Force and I served 20 years. So I started as an HR professional. So I'm what they call a core personnelist. So I was a human resources professional my entire military career, but I did stints in training and development. I did stints in recruiting, did stints in executive assistant and lots of other things, but it was all under the HR umbrella. And in 2019, I decided that I wanted to retire from the military. And so I had a mentor tell me, hey, you have a project management skill set, so you should go and explore that. And I went and I got certified through Vets to PM to be a certified project management professional. And the rest is history. Now, I really classify myself as a human resources project manager. If you think about anything in the professional world, it has a start and an end date, and it's creating unique value. And that is the definition of a project. So I personally love human resources, and that's how I became a human resources project manager.
That's awesome. I think project management is a skill that so many people could use in their career, regardless of their role. It could open up a lot of things. There's a lot of misunderstandings on it. Like, I've been involved in a project, which is great. We'll dive into some of that. Being retired military, what are the challenges you're seeing in the labor market with vets looking for their next role? Or do you have any insights into why an organization might be reluctant considering a vet?
The biggest challenge is just identifying that transferable skill set and truly translating the military language into language that the civilian sector is going to understand. And so first, we have to identify what our transferable skill sets are, right? And so most military members are walking out of the military with the project management skill set, human resources, cyber management, whatever it may be. And those skill sets are necessary in the civilian sector. And so we have to truly translate that experience, those knowledge, those skills and abilities in a way that civilians understand. So that's the biggest challenge. And with my company now at Vets to PM, that's our main goal, is to help you speak civilian fluently, because Marissa's such a great recruiter, but she asked the right questions that allowed me to translate my experience. However, you're not going to always deal with a recruiter that is that well-versed in understanding different people's experience. So you have to truly adapt and be able to translate your experience. And as far as what organizations can do, it really just comes down to recruiting and hiring manager basics. You're looking at this job posting, right? And let's be clear, the job posting is filled with roles and responsibilities. They're kind of guardrails, right? There's a lot of legalities in that job posting. But when you interview someone, if it's an informational interview or, hey, it's the real thing, it is your job to try to understand how their experience fits. Just like it's their job to try to translate how their experience fits, right? But it does have to be a two-way conversation, and an effective recruiter, an effective hiring manager will ask those questions to get down to the details. What did you do? How did you do it? What was the impact? And how can you do that in my organization?
There's a saying I heard, at least from a few different sources: if you want something done, someone from the military can get it done.
I mean, I'm a little biased, but I do agree.
But it is true. And I mean, I've worked with you and I've worked with some others that have served, and it's a different skill set. It's inspiring. It ups your own game because you're like, wait a minute, I want to learn from you. How do you approach that project or that problem? Because we come from different life experiences, and obviously there is a segment of the population that has served, and there's obviously a large segment that has not. And if you could tap into someone's resource, tell me about this. depending if you're active duty or not, and dealing with a project with intense stress. You're dealing with intense stresses at the time, or unbelievable time commitments where you need to get it done in 3 minutes. When other projects, you might have the luxury of it's over the course of a 3-month time period, and you're essentially going, okay, we can build this out in chunks with the right team on a project. What are some of the biggest leadership lessons you've learned in both military and corporate environments?
Yeah, I mean, one of the leadership lessons that I took from the military to the civilian sector is to truly consider that there's always more to consider. So as a leader, you have to understand that your big picture is very different than your direct report's big picture, right? People said to me a lot, they were like, you always seem like pretty like calm, cool, and collected. And it's not a really great compliment, but people say that I suffer better than most. And I think that is just understanding what's an emergency, what's not. And although that sometimes in production, a lot of things can be an emergency, how I would tackle those situations is I would just consider that there's more to consider. So if someone is running around like a chicken with their head cut off, this must be really important to them. How can I employ empathy to try to assist them in solving the problem? And one big thing that really helped me in my transition was just understanding that whatever someone thought was really important, it's really important to them. It is not my job to sort of say, hey, we shouldn't be focusing on this, or this is not that important. I need to understand why, considering that there's more to consider, and then just asking those questions, clarifying questions to get down to the root cause. That's what us project managers do. And understanding why someone's reacting or responding the way that they are. And Emily, a colleague of ours from our company, she always told me, she's like, just remember, if we're not doing it, there's a reason why we're not doing it. And that is so true. And so it's just understanding like, hey, you have to consider that there's way more to consider. You may not have all of the information. So ask those clarifying questions, and that will truly help you connect with the people. And it's really all about the people, right? And getting them to trust and respect you. So that way they can utilize your knowledge, skills, and abilities that you bring to the table.
Thinking of some of the stories we worked on together, it all just makes sense, seeing what you're working on now. It's like that was the next logical step. What are some of the key trends you're seeing like in HR today, especially like in talent development and retention, maybe in particular with veterans?
Well, one thing that I'm not sure if it's necessarily a trend, but I think it should be a trend, and especially where the job market is today. And we're going from I don't know if you think this, but I truly am seeing a decline in the W-2 employee and more of the 1099 employee. Mm-hmm. So what I think should be a trend is this generalized specialist, this T-shaped individual where we bring depth and breadth of knowledge, right? So we have education, we have certifications, but we also have experience as well. And if we have these generalized specialists in our organization, we shouldn't have a skill gap when an employee leaves, right? And so the goal should always be to have a couple people on deck, never having a single point of failure, and having people that can do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And as far as my experience, so I worked in HR for 2 years in the company that we worked at, and then I transitioned to a different position. And the best thing about that was that I was able to bring this HR perspective to that position. So they didn't have to consult HR. They didn't have to wait on an answer. I had this generalized specialist, this T-shaped knowledge, depth and breadth. And so that added to the organization. And also it saved us a lot of time, a lot of energy. And so that's kind of the trend that I'm seeing or would like to see. I know a lot of employees are not going to like it that I say that, but we have to stop thinking like, well, that's not my job. That's not within my job description. Most of us in the US are not on contract. And so most of us are at will. And so if you want to be someone who is valuable in the organization, who is maybe not thought of during layoff time, then become a generalized specialist, be T-shaped, depth and breadth of knowledge. Bring that, the education, the certification, but also the experience.
That's really good advice, because I remember hearing something similar to what you said probably over a decade, 15 years ago, and how by 20, whatever, it was something in the 20s, and we're already halfway through the 20s, that, there was going to be a huge surge in, 1099 work, versus W-2. We're seeing some people have a portfolio of a career versus the elevator or escalator of a corporate ladder, where they might do a little bit of 1 or 2 roles at a company, then move on, 1 role, 3 roles, consulting work, take a break just because life happens. And I've seen that also as well, where maybe previous generations or time periods, you would never even think of being able to take a career break for a number of reasons. I think COVID did change a lot of that. I remember working with some leadership and they're like, I will never, ever ask someone about a career break again on their resume because everyone's world got turned upside down. Having kids sit on Zoom calls at 9 a.m. at elementary was tough.
I remember being on the production floor, going down to the production floor, talking to people during that time frame. And I remember this specific incident where I saw a lady crying at her machine. And of course, I'm super concerned. And I went up to her and I was like, hey, I don't want to pry, but you're crying at the machine. Do we need to take a break? And she's shaking. And I was like, what's up? What's wrong? And I need to check my phone. My kid is locked in my bedroom because I don't have daycare. This is in the height of COVID, right? I don't have daycare, but I need to work and I can't check the security camera and I'm not allowed to have my phone. And that was the moment when I realized we have to change some things up in the organization. If we want our people to feel psychologically safe in the environment, want to come to work, we're kind of moving away from this remote, return to office, whatever it is. Like we have to start getting a bit clinical because soon, as much as the landscape is changing from the W-2 employee to the 1099, the landscape for the employee is changing too. They can make money on these social media platforms. They can do almost anything. And people's passion is now being monetized. So if we want to catch ourselves in a manufacturing plant with no employees, then we can go ahead and keep treating people like they are a number. But if we want people to actually be in those positions, we have to start treating them like individuals and start making some concessions in order to meet both the strategic objectives and just being a good human being.
Sometimes in HR, you forget, what's the first word of our department? Human.
Yeah, human resources. And it sucks because everyone thinks that we're just there for the company. And I do believe that there's a small percentage of human resource professionals that probably shouldn't be in HR, just like there's a lot of teachers that shouldn't be teaching. There's a lot of coaches that shouldn't be coaching. Like if you're in HR and people are a pain point for you, HR is not your gift. So get out of HR. But yeah, I mean, I hate to say it's very cliche, but we have to put the human back in human resources. But really it all comes down to, we have to just start being kind. It's not about the golden rule anymore, about treating people the way you want to be treated. It's all about treating people the way that they want to be treated. And in order to do that, you have to get to know your people.
What you just said is spot on. I agree with you 1,000%. There's some people that should not be working in HR, like you said, teachers and coaches. At the end of the day, we're employees too. And it is possible to be pro-employee and still pro-company and not just the fun police. Yes, there are policies, but we're all human at the end of the day. We all enjoy spending time with our families and doing hobbies. And it's like we have to ensure the right people are on the right positions.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't realize that. That's an unbelievable story about that person on the production line. And again, that's very different what she was going through. And I'm sure there's a lot of people like her in other organizations compared to someone 20 feet away from you at the dining room table on their laptop, playing around with their friends as they're supposed to be paying attention. And you're dealing with your own quote unquote fires to put out on your laptop, again, just 20 feet away. What advice, as you're working with veterans, what advice would you give them as they're looking to enter into project management or HR? We'll do a role reversal here. Again, I have not served, but let's say I've recently retired. I've left the military. I know I want to do something with people, and I've worked with you and others. Okay, HR seems to be something I'd be interested in. And every department always has a project, whether it's finance, HR, logistics. Learning project management is an essential skill. No matter where you go, as a 1099, a W-2, where do I start? Where do I jump in? So I work with you, vets to PM. Like, what do I take a course with you? Walk me through the process.
Yeah. So if you are separating or retiring from the service, I'm going to take us, back to the very beginning. The first, and any civilian can do this now. I mean, civilians pivot all the time, right? COVID was just the beginning. We're starting to realize that, I want to do some different things. Maybe I'll do it in a different industry or, HR person going to finance now or whatever it may be. So the first thing I always mentor people on is truly identify what kind of lifestyle do you want? Because veterans all the time will tell me, I want to make six figures and I want to do this and I want to do that. And in the same breath, they say, well, I want work-life balance and I want this and I want that. And I am here to tell you, based on my experience at our previous company, six-figure salaries require six-figure work. So the first thing to do is to identify what kind of lifestyle you want. And based on that, then I would ask, what kind of environments do you like to work in? Do you like big companies where there's thousands of people, lots of processes, lots of procedures, probably lots of resources, right? So there's lots of pros with that. Or do you like small or mid-level companies? And people that are coming from the military, they have experience with large units and small units because we all work in those as we progress in the military, because the size of the company matters, right? I'm so glad that I started at our company, because now I have a lot of, like mutual respect. Like working in a large company with 1,500 people, that's a different ballgame than my 12-person company that I work at now. So I think understanding the lifestyle that you want to live and the environment that you want to work in will help you now identify that transferable skill set. So when we talk about project management is a skill set. It's a function. It's not just a role and a responsibility, a career, or an industry. You manage projects. Every single podcast is a project, right?
Right.
And so identifying that transferable skill set, most of us have that, that project management or that human resources skill set. So that's the first battle, identify what that skill set is. And then VEX to PM, we're a small organization. We help you achieve a meaningful and lucrative post-service career based on whatever your definition is. There's lots of other resources out there that will help you do the same. But we help you identify that transferable skill set, and then we help you validate it with a professional certification. And here's why. Most people in the civilian sector understand what a PMP is, or a PHR is, or a SHRM certification is, right? And so Marissa said it to me best. She's like, oh, you have your APHR. So tell me what you know about human resources in the civilian sector. So I was able to speak the language because I went through that training. I have that certification. I'm doing my continuing education units. And even though I didn't specifically have experience with FMLA, Family Medical Leave of Absence, I had experience with convalescent leave in the military, and those are very similar. And Marissa asked me these questions that allowed me to showcase, right? So the third step is show and tell. So we want to identify our transferable skill sets. We want to validate them with a professional certification. And then we want to show and tell. So show and tell via the resume, the interview, and LinkedIn. And then once you do that, now you can start connecting with companies, people that, really respect your unique value add as a veteran. So I would start there, but that could be applied to anyone, right? To any professional. Identify what that transferable skill set is, validate it with something that other people are going to understand, show and tell it, and then connect with that industry or that company.
If you could give one piece of career advice to our listeners, what would it be?
It really all comes down to this one principle that I really live my life by now, because I believe that it's very applicable in any sort of profession, any sort of relationship, but it's, what do I know to be true? And so if you ask that question during the interview process or just to yourself, right? So let me give you an example. I was sitting at my cubicle one day at our company, right? And someone walked past the cubicle, and someone that always says hello to me, I was like, what's her problem? And so I made this stuff up in my head that, okay, I must have done something wrong, or they're being stuck up today, whatever, right? So I made up this whole story in my head, and really a day later, I realized, like, after talking to this person, like, she just suffered a loss in her family, and she was doing everything that she could in order to not lose it in the professional environment. And of course, I felt like a complete idiot, right? Because I made it about me. I think a lot of us make it about us. And so I read this book. It's by Wakeman. It's called Reality-Based Leadership. And I read it actually that night. I was referred to the book, and it's so crazy that this situation happened that day. And in the book, it says, you need to approach every text message, every email, every conversation, every interaction like repeating in your head, what do I know to be true? And it really just comes down to stop assuming, stop making judgments based on things that you don't know. And this can help you in your career. It can help you in your personal life. It can help you anywhere.
Yes.
It's just, you have, like when I receive a text message that says, we need to talk, right? What do I know to be true? We need to talk. I don't need to go ahead and catastrophize. I don't need to assume the worst case scenario, right? Because as easy as it is to assume the worst case scenario, it should be that simple to assume the best case scenario. So if you keep asking yourself the question in your head, what do I know to be true? That will help you with assuming and making judgments and truly just making mountains out of molehills. And I think that in the professional environment, people do it all the time. Like people will read a Slack message or a Teams message and be like, oh, I don't like her tone. No, what do you know to be true? What do you know to be true? So that's my best piece of advice. I repeat it in my head all the time.
That's probably one of the best pieces of advice I've heard because it's so relatable because we've all been there. I know I can say I have both in my professional and personal life. I made it about myself or I'm wondering A, B, or C and then realize, well, this is nothing. Yeah, it's kind of the same thing. An old friend of mine told me years ago at a company he worked with that he's an engineer and he said that he kept his head down, did everything he could just to get through the day. And he said he was always so scared he was going to be fired. And one time he got a call into HR and he was essentially sick to his stomach and his boss is in there and he thought, okay, I'll have 10 minutes to pack up my stuff. And he was getting promoted.
Yeah.
So, but he developed that story in his head to where, we've talked many times since then. He's like, I had to get out of my own way. I made myself physically ill and I was getting promoted. I was doing such good work. I was so worried about everything else. That's a great example. Just get out of your own way sometimes.
Yeah. And if you think about it, like, especially nowadays, like we're all sort of living life based on fear, right? And so I asked that question, what do I know to be true? Because I fear that people are upset with me, or I fear that I'm getting fired, or I fear, whatever. But the next piece of advice to go along with that is, okay, identify these top 2 or 3 fears that you have and start working to navigate that, right? So as an example, in the military, we have a lot of job security. And so one of my biggest fears when I retired from the military and entered the civilian sector was that fact that they could just call you and just lay you off, right? Fire you, at will in South Carolina. And then I wouldn't have any income coming in. So instead of living my life fearful of that, what I did was, okay, this is my fear. My fear is getting laid off. My fear is not getting a paycheck. What do I need to do in order to navigate that fear? Okay, well, let me have a couple things going on as far as a couple side hustles. Let me always market myself on LinkedIn, never stop networking. Let me, interview for places I wasn't necessarily looking for a job, but I interviewed several different times throughout my 4 years just to keep it fresh and see, and then have options too, right? Because every recruiter you talk to, they could be a connection and a network. So, what do I know to be true is sort of like the 1.0. But now fearing, like, what are your fears? Name your 2 fears and name what you can do to navigate those fears, right? So that way, if you are laid off or if the worst case scenario occurs, it's kind of like project management. It's risk assessment, right? You now have your risk responses ready to go. And I live my life like a project manager. I mean, I assess risk and respond to risk all the time. I have plans in my head how I'm going to navigate this, overcome this, but it's really what you have to do now in life. We don't want to live in fear. So instead, let's navigate it.
Yeah. And that's a great takeaway because like you said, 1.0 is this, and then 2.0 is what can you do? And then 3.0 is like, okay, that could be diversifying your income stream. So you have 2 or 3 things going, your traditional job, maybe you're selling things on the side, monetizing a hobby or a passion on the weekends, do something digital where you just do it once and try to monetize it through a license, or you're teaching a course on the weekends. I mean, there's so many ways, and then that could lead to a whole different, skill set and opportunities. It's funny you said that about risk assessment, because if you think about it, HR is also in the risk management business without the title, and sometimes without the paycheck. Because you're always managing risk. We make sure we don't violate this law. Is there a safety standard with a plant? Did a hiring manager make a mistake by asking the wrong questions we know that are illegal?
That you're not allowed. And yes, the answer is yes. They asked the wrong questions.
Yep. HR 101, you learn that real quick. These are ones, even if it's from a good place by accident, right? You just,
Yeah.
you don't do it. Stick to the
Yep.
script.
Yep. Me and Emily would just kick people underneath the table like, no.
Yep. It's all like a risk management, looking at a new software tool. This is going to help us do A, B, and C. The risk is it costs more than we had budgeted for, or the risk is it's not going to be in compliance in 5 years because of GDPR, data privacy out of Europe, or AI is a big one right now. I mean, there's several great tools with AI, but they're also getting into privacy and data and a lot of things. Companies could be at risk. You have to, take a risk assessment, like you said. One of the things I wanted to touch base on, you said you approach everything as a project manager, which I've been trying to do that in a lot of aspects of my life as well. This projects around the house, that one big digital project, on the home computer, family photos that you want to get to someday, in your Google Photos. I always like to say one thing I learned is if it's 2 hours or less, it's a task. If it's 2 hours or more, it's a project. Now, your mileage may vary, but that's one quick and dirty tip I learned. And as I approach things I need to do in my personal and professional life, I've stuck to that. And it's gotten me pretty far going, okay, this is a task. And then this, I can delegate this to someone on the team. I know that they've been wanting to get involved in this kind of project. But one of the things I noticed on your LinkedIn page is your F-45 training there in Sumter. Because if, looking at how you broke it down, it's project. Whether it's a fitness or exercise routine, I'm going to take away from our conversation is approaching things like a project. I want to hit this many reps on my Peloton by this time in the spring or summer, or I want to get into heavy lifting by this much weight, or I want to learn to cook a 5-star meal and not just not just make a meal with culinary expertise. Well, recipes are a project.
True.
I liked reading that part in the book you recommended. I'll put all that in the show notes. And I wanted to touch base on what I call my Encore section, like a band does.
Yes.
Towards the end of their performance. So we'll have some fun. What is like a bucket list trip that you have on your radar?
Every year, my friend and I, my bestie from the military, we're much closer now. So she lives in Pennsylvania and I live in South Carolina. But every year we go to a concert. So a couple of years ago, we went to the Sonic Temple Festival, the 4-day music festival. And so we went there. Godsmack was playing. And then last year we went to Alanis Morissette. And this year we tried to get Pearl Jam tickets, but that didn't work out. We couldn't get them. And now we're looking at Sonic Temple because Metallica is opening and closing, but Metallica is also playing in like Charlotte and Philadelphia. So every year we do a concert because when we were in the military, we really couldn't do much together. So yeah, as far as my bucket list, it's a concert every year. So that's something that now being retired, really want to kind of live my best life. I always tell veterans, like, now it's time for us to enjoy the things that we served and protected for so long. And so, yeah, going to concerts, having a good time with my bestie.
Yeah, I've never been to that festival, but I've heard wonderful things.
It's a very well-run festival. I'm telling you, Jay, I cannot go anywhere without thinking, who's the project manager? But the first year we went, I was so amazed at all the little things that were thought of, like the first aid stations and stuff like that. But people always ask me what my favorite music is, and I don't have an answer because I love everything. So like my Spotify playlist, like you'll see Alanis Morissette, Metallica, Kendrick Lamar, you'll see EDM on there. It really all just depends on what kind of mood I'm in. When I do work, I'm always listening to EDM with no words. So I don't know why, but that makes me focus. It doesn't calm me down, but it kind of helps me, get motivated and productive.
Yeah, it's very similar. I listen to a lot of EDM when I'm reading emails or crafting emails or typing a document because it allows me to focus and not worry about lyrics so much.
Yeah.
But if I ever am giving a presentation, and there's a good chance about 10 minutes prior to that, I was blasting Iron Maiden or Pearl Jam or Metallica.
Yeah, I call it my pregame.
Yeah.
So I pregame before I go to the gym. I used to pregame all the time before I would give these big presentations at our last company. I mean, music is a big part of my life for a lot of different reasons. But I love and my son is 17 now. So every time he takes a shower, he blasts his music. And I hear all like old school Metallica and stuff like that. And then I hear new school, which I have no idea what it is. But it's crazy that that's the one thing that we have in common is music. I remember him being a 3-year-old in the backseat coming home from church and listening to Matt Redman and then playing Guitar Hero with him and my husband jamming out to Metallica. So music is definitely like the unifier, right? It brings people together. And yeah, I can't wait to go to more concerts. You know, the problem is now is that there's so many good ones happening, but you literally can't go to all of them. First, they're too much. It's way too expensive. And plus, you know, we all work for a living. So
Yeah, you have to pick and choose for sure. That's great that you went to that festival and saw it. You had your project management hat on going, this is well run, because the Fire Festival was a disaster. Woodstock 99 was a complete disaster. But contingency plans weren't there, or the wrong people were involved, or they didn't think of, someone didn't raise their hand and say, what about A, B, or C? You have this like many water. People here. Yeah.
No one thought of water?
Yeah. You can sell vodka and beer all day, but what about water?
Yeah.
On hot,
no one
on
thought
hot
about
pavement.
Water? Yeah, a lot of those documentaries, I mean, again, I literally cannot watch anything without asking the question, like, where was the project manager? Where is the basic checklist? But it really just comes down to everything in life is a project. If it has a start and an end date, if it's creating unique value. And so even your music festivals.
What is the last show you binge watched? I know you're very busy, but is there any particular show on Netflix or HBO, any of those platforms that you just fell in love with?
Yeah, so I actually don't watch TV, but I read. So I read a lot. I don't know, maybe like 10 books a month. But right now I'm binging the Hunger Games series. So,
okay.
Yeah, the Hunger Games actually has the trilogy, right? The three basic books, but they have a 4th book and a 5th book. The 4th book goes back like 20 years before the first Hunger Games, which is really interesting. I'm in the middle of that now. And then the 5th book, I think, does the same thing. They're like prequels. So that's my last series. But I just binged the 4th Wing series 2, 4th Wing, Iron Flame, and Onyx Storm. But I'm also, I love thrillers and romance books. But yeah, I don't really get too much joy out of watching TV. And also, I don't sit long enough. People ask me all the time, like, how do you read? Like, let's just be honest. I'm not reading a book. I'm listening. When I get up in the morning, I'm doing chores. I'm listening to a book. When I get ready, I'm listening to a book. You know, I don't listen when I'm working because I can't focus that way. But if I have earpods in my ears, I'm listening to a book. But I don't watch TV much.
It's funny. I talked to another person recently. I asked him, what do you do to relax? And large career in HR, he watches Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck and Elmer Fudd. And he said, I loved how they did the animations and they were ahead of their time and they were really good. And I said, yeah, that whole series is kind of a metaphor of HR.
It really is. We could go down a whole rabbit hole on that one.
And I said,
no pun intended.
Yeah, maybe I'll give that a shot someday, because that's watching Bugs Bunny and all those cartoons sounds better than watching trash TV.
You know, I think everybody has their own, like I read trash books. I mean, all my books are trashy, but I just don't sit long enough to watch a show. I guess I could put Netflix in my ear, but I feel like I would have to pay attention. I don't multitask work. I don't multitask important things, but
right.
I will multitask cleaning and getting ready and whatever. And I think the best way for me to do that is to read a book. I listen to music as well, but the music for me is like, it has to be in my car or at a workout or whatever. So
as we're winding down here, Misty, this has been an incredible insight and conversation. It's great to be able to connect and learn different avenues of people's life experiences, bringing it into the workplace. For those interested in project management, training, or fellow veterans looking to connect, or just someone wants to reach out and say hello, like, what's the best way to reach you?
LinkedIn. So Misty Moreno, not too many of us out there. I have my calendar invite in my profile. And so if you wanted to chit chat for a little bit, please do so. Set up a time. You can message me. And for any veteran who is curious about project management, whatever it is, yeah, let's chat. It really comes down to identifying your transferable skill set, validating it, and then being able to show and tell. And then any civilian that is interested in project management as well, I mean, you don't have to be a project manager as far as your title. A PMP certification and project management professional certification will help you learn the standard of managing projects. So then that way you can improve and grow and develop in your professional career. And I tell this story all the time. I'm an HR professional, but at our old company, we had this project, this building expansion project and a machine installation project as well. Same. So we built a building to install this new machine. And it's been going on for a very long time, and we're over budget and we're not within scope and all this stuff. And everyone's like, I don't know what's wrong. And I was like, why don't you let me manage the project? Let's see what we can do. And everyone said to me, you're HR, you're not an engineer. And I was like, well, you've had engineers manage the project for the last 2 years. So I'm not sure that's working out for you. So let me do it. Right. So I managed it for 2 months because I resigned after that. But in those 2 months, we established some really good processes for meeting management and stakeholder management, task management. And that's really what it comes down to. A project is most likely out of scope, not within budget, and not within schedule because we don't have these basics. And project management allows you to learn the basics, right? Organization, meeting management, email management, communication management, stakeholder management, and really just how to, get shit done. So project management is the way to go.
Yeah, I've been debating doing my PMP. I might have to pick your brain on a separate call. If you found value in today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. Until next time, keep rocking HR excellence.